Li Bai, Clear and Bright Tunes, number one. The clouds remind me of her dress, the flowers of her face. A spring breeze moves the trellis, peonies sweet with dew. Even if I had not seen her up on many jades' peak, here, under the moon, on this jeweled terrace, we would surely meet. So we continue this section of seven-word quatrain Fu with a suite of three poems by Li Bai, who therefore, as I mentioned earlier on, I think, is the best represented poet in this section. Now, this series of poems, these clear and bright tunes, and other translations, a song of pure happiness, or a more literal one would probably be something like pure and peaceful music. This set of poems is not generally among the best regarded by Li Bai. They're not generally included in a lot of anthologies, but they have an anecdote, they have a story that goes with the poems that makes them interesting from that point of view, and they're frequently associated and retold with those anecdotes in mind. Now, those anecdotes are meant to show both Li Bai's recklessness, his Taoistic and genius-like indifference to the respect for hierarchies and positions and conventions. At the same time, they're meant to show his genius as an improviser, as a person that, under any circumstances, is able to compose a poem. These three poems were composed under the order of the emperor and in very specific surroundings that we will comment now, but they show us, at the very least, if not the best characteristics of Li Bai's verse, at least his ability for shameless flattery and his ability for improvisation. So let's go with the anecdote. So the story goes that while Li Bai was at the court serving in the Hanlin Academy, one night the emperor, the emperor here is Xuanzong, and the anecdote is a story of Emperor Xuanzong and his famous consort, Lady Yang Guifei, whose adventures and misfortunes we've encountered in other poems in this series. So, well, the emperor this is in his late years, probably in the Tianbao era, or maybe in the 740s. And the emperor was, like besotted with this woman. One of the things he did with her was, rehearsals of dancing, because the emperor liked a lot dancing and playing musical instruments. So one day, while the emperor was, enjoying a performance with different dancers, musicians, singers, and so on, and the emperor sent Li Guinian, who was the composer in chief in court, to bring Li Bai so that he could compose some lyrics for songs to be sung at this festival, at this imperial entertainment. And Li Guinian got to Li Bai's residence. Li Bai was blind drunk, and he was more or less pushed into into a sedan chair and forced to go to the imperial palace. He vomited on the way, and so he soiled completely his clothes. Now, once he arrived at the palace, again he vomited, and the Grand Eunuch Gao Lishi, tried to get him into shape. He gave him a hangover soup, and at that time, Li Bai did a very arrogant thing. Well, he might be partially excused because he was drunk, but he ordered the chief eunuch of the empire to take off his boots, which was pretty insulting because the chief eunuch only did those things for the emperor, like he was an important political authority, even if he was a eunuch and despised by the scholar officials. So anyway, the thing is, after this, impromptu and at the emperor's urge, Li Bai composes three poems, and the poems are not actually about the music which he was supposed to compose them to, the dance that was taking place, the rainbow and feather garment dance. He composed three poems about Yang Guifei. And, allegedly, Yang Guifei and the emperor adored these poems, they loved them. And even though they are, as we said, light and commonplace, but as we will see when we comment this couplet, for example, the images are pretty hackneyed. But, the royal couple was amazed that Li Bai could still produce charming lines, even in such an impaired state. And, Lady Yang enjoyed the poems and gave him a parakeet as a present. It is also said that Gao Li Shi, the eunuch, became really angry at Li Bai because of his humiliation, and thereafter strived to malign Li Bai to the emperor and to Yang Guifei with false rumors and accusations, like implying that these poems were not really appropriate praises of Yang Guifei, and that included veiled criticism or sneering. And this allegedly was the reason why Li Bai stopped serving at court shortly after this, and never ended up serving at the court again, and spent the last of his years in the provinces. So that's the anecdote. Probably there is only a grain of truth in it, if any at all, especially the part of humiliating the eunuch by getting the boots out, and this being the reason for Li Bai's exile. I think other sources tend to point more in the direction that he was just a carefree and reckless individual, and he committed missteps at the court. But anyway, that's the anecdote. So from this story, we get the topic of the poem. The poem and the two successive versions that we will read in the next days, they're all meant to be poems of praise of a woman, of exaltation and flattery of this wonderful woman, who is not any woman in a generic or abstract way. It's very specifically Yang Guifei, the favored consort of Emperor Xuanzong. So that's the topic of the poem, and in this first poem basically does two things. It describes the lady with pretty conventional images, but emphasizing her beauty and the beautiful setting in which she is in. And then in the second couplet, she's actually being compared to an immortal goddess. So let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet and dwell on those images. So first couplet. The clouds remind me of her dress, the flowers of her face. A spring breeze moves the trellis, peonies sweet with dew. So this is, I suppose, because of the reference to the moon at the end, this is supposed to be a night scene. And so the poem starts with a pretty conventional image. So the poetic persona, is looking at the woman, and two comparisons: her clothes are like the clouds, her face is like a flower. So those images are pretty conventional. Flowers being equated with women, is a very conventional trope of Tang poetry and previously. And also the billowing folds of the robes of the clothes that were worn in the Tang dynasty, very easily equated with clouds, with moving clouds. So this is just the image. I'm looking at her. The clouds remind me of her dress, the flowers of her face. So that's her. And the second line is the background. Where is this beauty who's like a flower and whose clothes seem to be billowing and moving like clouds, perhaps under the effect of dancing or under the effect of a slight breeze? It says the second line, a spring breeze moves the trellis, peonies sweet with dew. So we are in the imperial palace in some sort of pavilion. It's spring, therefore the second line gives us the season, and there's a breeze blowing and it's moving. It doesn't say it's moving her dress, it's rather moving the trellis. So probably in her pavilion, next to the gardens, there is some trellis, or next to the windows, and they're being lightly moved. And maybe on the trellis there are flowers and peonies. So her association with a flower in the first line evokes the real flowers that can be seen by the poet in the second line. It's interesting that the flowers are peonies, sweet with dew. Dew, because dew falls at night or in the early morning. Now, peonies were the favored flower of the Tang. Just like the tulips created an obsession in 17th century Holland, peonies were an obsession for Tang Dynasty China. They cultivated them, they developed new varieties with new colors, even sometimes drenching the roots of the flowers in different inky substances to give new different colors to the peonies. The aristocrats and the mandarins went to flower viewing parties and flower picking parties, where the ideal, the prized flower was the peony. And the peonies have, this very obvious beauty. It's not like it's a subdued or delicate sort of beauty that requires intellectual appreciation. And we could say that this is a bit also like the Tang Dynasty itself. Like most periods of expansive empire have this sort of cosmopolitan, prosperous, rich culture and society in which the empire is not afraid of foreigners, is not afraid of receiving inputs, and is not afraid of being gaudy and showing off the richness and the power of the empire. So in a way, the peony, apart from being an obsession from the Tang, is a good symbol of this period of obvious beauty, of gilded, shining, and gold age, and in literature and in economy and society, and especially in Shanzang's reign, which is the zenith of this period of glory and power. But anyway, that's a digression. So we've got this beautiful lady. Her face is like a flower. Her robes are floating. She's in some sort of a beautiful garden or pavilion, and the dew is blowing gently on the trellises decorated with peonies. That, and again, another flower. And, Yang Guifei is like the absolute peony, the greatest flower, who beats and puts to shame the beauty of the peonies. Now, a second couplet. The second couplet continues with this ham-fisted flattery, and it jumps one step up. Not only is Yang Guifei like a flower, a beautiful lady, she's like a goddess. And, there were a lot of poems from the Chutzu and later on about beautiful goddesses appearing to poets, these immortal women having alliances with mortals, and they are described as, these absolutely gorgeous women with all of the perfections in all of the body parts and everything. So the poet plays that game and says, this woman is like a goddess. And he says, even if I had not seen her up on many jades peak, here under the moon on this jeweled terrace, we would surely meet. So, basically, so the second couplet, as I said, evokes this supernatural presence. Even if I had not seen her up on many jades peak, here under the moon on this jeweled terrace, we would surely meet. So the poet implies that he has already seen her in many jades peak. I'm not precisely sure what this many jades peak is referencing, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the mountains of the immortals. This would be Yushan, and it's probably one of the places where immortals dwelt. I think there was a jade mountain in the south where a princess in the past was supposed to have become a goddess and disappear in the mist. So there's probably different legends, different stories about goddesses dwelling in this jade mountain, in this many jades peak. So the poet is implying, if I hadn't seen you once when in the past I traveled to one of these Taoistic mountains and experienced a trance of seeing these immortal beauties, these goddesses manifest themselves, if I hadn't seen you then, definitely now I have been able to see you. And, the implication is pretty clear. It's that the person, the woman, Yang Guifei, is like, or exactly is, one of these immortal goddesses, and she's now beautiful under the moon in this jeweled terrace. And if the first meeting hadn't taken place with a goddess, now definitely in this slightly surreal, nightly, palatial scene, now Levi has definitely encountered a goddess. So yeah, interesting piece, as I said, basically. Because of its context, the poem is not bad, although, it's pretty conventional. Other translations are available, and we can give them a look and comment them a little bit. So this one, for example, is by Witter Binner. He calls it A Song of Pure Happiness, and it goes like this. Her robe is a cloud, her face a flower, her balcony glimmering with the bright spring dew. Is either the tip of Earth's jade mountain, or a moon-edged roof of paradise. So the poem takes a considerably different take. So the first line starts like our version. with basically the image of her clothes of the lady like a cloud and her face as a flower. Second line takes a different take. It doesn't mention specifically the peonies. The original, I'm looking at the original. The original just has hua, the character for flowers. So it doesn't specify that it's peonies, although it might have been supposed from context. And yeah, it includes a bar, a railing, a jian, or a threshold. So the view in this poem is, first we describe the woman. The second line paints us her balcony, and it's a place, shimmering with the spring dew. But the flowers are not mentioned in this poem. Again, the second line describes the scene. After the first line describes the woman, the second line describes the scene in which the woman is. But it just puts the emphasis on the balcony. And in fact, this poem makes the biggest changes in the second couplet, which instead of describing Yang Guifei, seems to be describing the balcony in which Yang Guifei is. It says this balcony is either the tip of Earth's jade mountain, yeah, or is a moon-edged roof of paradise. So now, the effect is globally the same. It's the idea that Yang Guifei is this beauty that is like a flower and is like a goddess, because the place in which she is, this balcony, is a celestial realm. It is either the tip of Jade Mountain or a moon-edged roof of paradise. So the space in which she is the space in which goddesses and supernatural beings are. So therefore, by metonymy, the person inside them is also meant to be seen, to be appreciated, to be understood as a goddess of sorts. And to conclude, here is another version of the poem. This is by Hajin, who wrote a biography of Li Bai. Her gown brings to mind clouds, and her looks flowers. The breeze caresses the rails, glazed with thick dew. If she is not at the peak of Jade Hills, where gods reside, you can find her at the Jasper Terrace, bathed in moonlight. So again, it is a similar take. I think this is closer to Binner's version. Again, the first line is just the description of the lady with those two comparisons with flower and cloud. The second line focuses on the rails. Well, the rails, it doesn't mention a balcony here, so the rails wouldn't have to be the rails of a balcony. They could be the rails at the entrance of a pavilion or sorts. But you get this physical space with railings covered with dew, which is also the image in Binner's poem. But the second couplet does not yet continue to describe the building. It tells you where the lady can be found. So she said, you can find her in the palace, in the mountain of the immortals, or you can find her here in this Jasper Terrace, in the imperial palace, bathed in the moonlight. So it continues with the same idea. Yang Guifei is like a goddess and says, you can find her there among the gods, or now, if you're lucky, you can find her here in the earthly realm, in the imperial palace, in this Jasper Terrace. So, yeah, overall, quite an interesting piece.